Oh, there we go. Boy, you guys, you got me, man. I apologize for being late. Thank you for everybody who is here and waiting. If Pierce makes the 53, can you ask DeMeco if he has, or if he will ask Pierce to gain some weight? That's a good question. We'll get to that because DeMeco was asked about DeMeco. DeMeco was asked about Dameon Pierce. It's been a long day yet again. Hours away from our 2024 roster. Yes, although as we know, it's that final cut does end up being not the final cut because as guys are getting released, then you get that many more afterwards. So let me pull DeMeco's press conference up here, get the transcripts out so I can tell you what was asked. I cut out all the questions. I've seen all the questions and a few of the answers, but not all of them. I just kind of reordered them based on questions, based on relevance. So got 9 or 10 of the questions that he answered here at the press conference. The ones that are, I think, the most pressing and the most relevant, he answered the shortest. One of them, credit to John McClain, I think, asked this question, was about the fact that I don't think this was news to NFL rosters. I think it was news to the media at large that there was a new rule this year that they tried to pass, that they did pass, where you can have a third string emergency quarterback who's on your practice squad. And originally the plan was that you're going to be able to elevate him every week to be the emergency quarterback. The NFLPA vetoed it to where you can only do this 3 times per year. So that's relevant because, some of the speculation was that, okay, that might be the Case Keenum spot. Case Keenum is going to be out for a few weeks with the injury sustained in the game the other day. So that complicates matters even further. I don't know if they would want Case more than 3 games, just given his age and where he is physically and everything. So I don't know if this rule would affect them that much, but John McClain, I believe, asked DeMeco on how they plan to handle the quarterback room on both the 53-man roster and the practice squad.
We're still working through that when it comes to the third quarterback situation. Still working through that, and we'll figure that out, tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, I'll give you a warning here. The first 3 answers are pretty short because they're the ones that are the hardest to answer. So he's not going to tell us exactly what they're planning on doing with the quarterback room. With Case's injury, it could go into a million different directions. And, how much do they like Tim Boyle? Do they, want to keep Tim Boyle as the second string guy? If you start Case, you can start 2 guys on IR that can later be pulled up during the season. It used to be if you were on IR at the beginning of the season, then you couldn't be one of the guys that they called back up. Now they're giving you 2 exemptions there. But do you want to waste that on a backup quarterback when Christian Harris or somebody else maybe needs it? I don't know. I don't like how everything feels right now when it comes to some of these very important things. Speaking of which, the question was asked, how is Will Anderson Jr. coming along? Let's gauge, because I haven't heard this. I saw that it was a short answer. I cut it down. Let's gauge by the tone of DeMeco's voice if we feel really good about Will Anderson or not.
Yeah, we'll see where Will is over the next couple of days. Will has been doing really good.
All right. I don't feel awesome. I don't know. We'll see where Will is over the next couple of days. Will has been doing really good. Espada's got me freaked out a little bit because Espada will say that guys like Christian Javier or Jose Urquidy are feeling really good right up until the day you find out that they're having Tommy John surgery. So I don't know if I can glean anything from that. Some of you guys are skeptical of my ability to read DeMeco's coach speak, and frankly, I take umbrage with that. It's one of the things that offends me most. I don't dislike you because of it, but I'm a little bit insulted because I think that DeMeco, it's really hard to read DeMeco's coach speak because I think I think he's very uncomfortable with it because it's okay. I was in the press conference, or I was in the press box the other day, and somebody in the media asked me, so Seth, when DeMeco said the other day that, he thought it was the blocking that was the issue with Dameon Pierce. What did you think of that? And I said, well, I think there's a chance he might be protecting Dameon and that he doesn't necessarily feel completely that way, that maybe they're not happy with him. And I was just taken aback a little bit because he said, you think he was lying? And I was like, well, I mean, lying is a harsh term. Coach speak. It's coach speak. It's you try not to say too much. Or the other day when they said they'd seen enough out of Dameon. Like, okay, is that coach speak for just we've made a decision on it? It could mean a lot of different things. Next question. So I don't know where Will Anderson is. I think Will Anderson, I trust, will be okay because he's had ankle issues before. He's worked through them. The Christian Harris thing, because it's such a mystery and it was so out of the blue, that's the one that still freaks me out a little bit. Next question was, and again, a short answer, if running back Dameon Pierce not playing in the last preseason game means that they have what they need to make a decision.
Yeah, our decisions will be made on the roster, guys, over the next couple of days. And you guys will know we still have a lot of things to work through when it comes to the roster. You know, when you talk about those guys specifically, Mechie and Dameon, I think both guys they've done really well in practice settings and also in the game. So both guys I've seen, I know what those guys are about. I know who they are as people. And so, but you guys will see those decisions here over the next couple of days.
Okay, so he's a master of suspense. Over the next couple days, I don't know if there are any. I haven't seen you. You guys would tell me. I haven't checked the news in like 3 hours, which is a dicey thing to do before you go onto a live stream about right around cut time. But I didn't see anything flash across my screen. Yeah, Jeffrey, this is the thing though. I know coach speak better than the fans, and yet it's kind of like there's an old Richard Feynman quote that if you think you know quantum physics, if you think you understand quantum physics, then you don't understand quantum physics. That's what coach speak is like. Basically the same level of complexity. All the rules are turned upside down. Things don't necessarily make logical sense. And I know that you just can't think you know what they're talking about if they're doing it right. The old classic coach speak quantum physics analogy. I know it's worn out. Next question. Oh, so as far as Dameon, sorry. I know one of you guys doesn't like that I talk about Dameon, and yet I can't help it, man. It's relevant. It's what people care about right now. I think right now I'm leaning towards the most likely scenario is that they're considering whether to trade Dameon Pierce, and I would not be surprised if they've gotten some offers. I don't know if they're huge offers or anything, but Dameon's shown enough upside. I know there have been offers for reportedly offers for John Mechie. I'd be surprised if they let go of Mechie. If you think about Mechie, okay. Let's say hypothetically somebody offers a second round pick. All right, well, you spent a second round pick on John Mechie, and you'd be taking a flyer on another second rounder who, okay, would be cheaper, but there's only a 50% chance that any average second rounder is actually it's actually less than a 50% chance that he's going to be in like an every game year in, year out starter. It's like a 33% chance. And Mechie is still cheap. So I'll be surprised if they trade him. And now second rounder is a nice high price, but I'd be surprised if they trade him. Dameon might be another story just because I think honestly, I think DeMeco and Caserio both love Dameon Pierce. And I think that this would be one of those situations where they want to do right by Dameon. And if maybe there's an offer from a team that they feel is a good situation for Dameon, this might be the kind of situation where they have the conversation with Dameon himself and try to figure it out and do right by him. And maybe it would be better off somewhere else. But I don't know. Next question was if his first cut last year, how was his first cut last year compared to this season? And if it's tougher to make cuts with the talent they have this season.
Yeah, thanks, John. This is always a difficult time for me. One of the most difficult times last year, for sure, as a first-time head coach, having to make the decisions and talking to these guys is it's one that I don't take lightly because it's a delicate situation. It is tougher, I would say, this time around because we have a lot of really good, talented players, right? And some guys, unfortunately, will not be able to make it at this time, although they are NFL players. And one thing I always try to stress to our guys is I want all of our guys, like once they're in our building, I want all of our guys to make the NFL, even though it may not be here with us at this moment. Right, I'm still pulling for these guys. All right, once I coach them, they're always my players, so I'm always pulling for these guys.
Yeah, DeMeco. I don't think DeMeco lacks for empathy, and that's hard sometimes. When you're a quote unquote player's coach, It's these are hard this time of year. I can one of the most uncomfortable things I've felt in terms of empathy was for when Gary Kubiak called to cut me, and it was the first time in my life I'd been cut from an NFL team, and I found myself like 2 minutes into it, just like thinking about Kubiak, and like by the tone of his voice, I felt really bad for him. I had a little heads up from somebody that let me know it was probably coming down the pike, so I was mentally prepared for it. But that was the first year. Let's see. I know it would have been the second year. It was after his first year as coach. But it's hard. It's hard for guys like DeMeco or any of those guys. I wanted to address one thing I saw here. Dark Side, where are you? Dark Side said something. Here we go. Okay. It doesn't matter what coach says. Y'all keep saying he's getting traded. I don't know if everybody's saying that. Now, I guess I'd ask you, and I know you're not, saying that aggressively or anything. I don't know if he's said anything the last couple times he's been asked questions about Dameon. Has he said anything that really makes it seem like he wouldn't be getting traded? It hasn't been like a full-throated endorsement. It's been a little bit of equivocation. Like, think about what he said at the root of it all. If he said it with a different tone of voice, what if he said, I'll paraphrase what he said, but what if he said something like, we've seen everything we need to see out of Dameon? He didn't say it like, hey, we've seen everything we need to see out of Dameon. He's on this team. He's our guy. He hasn't said that. So that's where trying to interpret the coach speak or the tone of voice and everything, it gets really dicey. He could just be trying to play his cards close to the vest. I think the fact that it hasn't been as emphatic an endorsement as, say, Nick Caserio when he talked in the pregame a couple weeks ago about Davis Mills. He just flat out said, Davis Mills is our backup quarterback. When you venture too much into that territory, then all of a sudden, then people start judging your other questions. So it's hard to say. I think my read on it is that they're at least considering it. That there's a decision they have to make about Dameon Pierce, and just me reading his body language, which is incredibly dicey. And based on how I feel about like my assessment of Dameon right now, it's probably time to pull the cord and figure out what the best way to do that is. But that's why nobody really knows. Next question. I know, Kyle, I know you need comedy. I was thinking about this earlier. I was trying to write a couple of things for a video I'm doing on CJ Stroud, and it's not in me right now, man. I don't have it. I'm too emotionally distraught over all these players that are going to be gone. You heard DeMeco when he said it's harder this year. Basically, DeMeco said it was a bunch of bums last year. He didn't say that. That's how I hear it. I mean, last year you're like, yeah, we're cutting you. Like, we don't need your services. This year, he's got an emotional attachment to these guys. It's just different. So the next question was on how he and Nick Caserio go about looking at other teams' cuts and which players might fit the team.
Well, for myself, right, I let Nick and his staff, our scouting staff, they'll do a good job of trying to comb through the rosters here over the next couple of days to see if there's anywhere we can, add and upgrade our roster. So, but for me, right now just dealing solely with the guys that we have on our team, and I just rely on Nick and his staff and trust the work that they put in, right, to see if there's anybody else that they feel that's worthy of, upgrading our roster. So I rely heavily on them when it comes to those decisions.
Real quick, let's see. Dark Side. Okay. He said he's pleased with what he saw. There's been no negative talks about Dameon Pierce from the yeah, and I didn't. All right, Dameon or Dark Side Dev. Did I claim that there's been negative talk about Dameon? Does DeMeco talk negative about anybody? Like, so I don't know. Now you're arguing against ghosts. You're arguing against you're coming up with straw man arguments against stuff I didn't actually say. So I cannot address you anymore, Dark Side Dev. Let's see. As far as all the players, I mean, there's 1,000 players that hit the market in the course of 48 hours. And then there's that first wave. But then as some other guys, some of those cuts, some of those guys who are cut get picked up, there's more cuts off the roster. So the Texans will cut it down to 53, but then there's always another couple days that get guys that get cut in a couple days after that because somebody else becomes available, so they swap it out. So it's just that's where it becomes the GM side of the building. DeMeco's not sitting there and like DeMeco has eyes on the 1,500 regular season players plus the other 1,000 extra guys or so that are out there. So that's Nick having a good feel for the types of players that DeMeco, gosh, between DeMeco and Dameon, I'm really screwing this up. The types of players that DeMeco likes, and then maybe he knows a few of them so they can chat with it. But it has to go. I mean, it's bang, bang, bang. There's a lot of high-level decisions that like we grouse about or like fret about over a computer for 2 hours, or just as simple fans that those guys have to make in the heat of the moment. Okay. I think Landry asked this question. How important is a fullback in this offense, and if they'll be able to function without a fullback in some situations this season by using other positions in the backfield?
Oh, great question, Landry. I think with that position, right, called the fullback tight end position, right, I think it's very, very flexible, right, and it's dependent upon right who you're facing, right, and the defensive structures that you're facing that particular week, and how does it, how do we gain an advantage by utilizing that position, right? To whether it's to create angles in the running game or to create a mismatch in the passing game as well. So it's all predicated on who you're playing that particular week, and does that position provide an advantage for you? So I think there are times, and there are games certainly when you can utilize that position to your advantage.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's where I think most teams that use a fullback, you don't want to press too hard to think you have to have a fullback, because then you just put somebody in that's the old, hey, he's versatile in that he can play tight end, but he sucks as a fullback. But we want to play with a fullback. I think with Beck, Beck is a hybrid tight end / fullback. That's what we've had a lot in Houston. I think around the league, you line up a tight end at fullback and call him a fullback, but it's different than having a Vontae Leach type of guy. Ideally, you've got a guy, who's got the old fullback body dimensions. Like Juszczyk is a squatty little dude, but he's capable as a receiver. That's a tough thing about tight ends. There's something about a fullback, a shorter, thick fullback. He can get underneath defensive linemen and underneath linebackers and really just root them out. And it's really hard for these tall tight end types to do that same with the same level of violence. And that's where it's just you're still limited when you're using a tight end type back there. I like British, man. I just like the vision of British Brooks and potentially what he could do as a fullback, but also line up at tailback at times. Because then you're taking a running back / fullback hybrid, fullback hybrid. And I like Harrison. Just, man, he struggled. I don't think you can rely on him to be your fullback right now. So if Andrew Beck isn't available, I don't know if Brooks and the possibility of him developing into a fullback ends up making a difference or not, but it might be a conversation they're having. Next question. This was interesting. On how much input players have in the roster cuts. I heard these two answers because Sarge asked them, and I don't know if DeMeco was on the same page as Sarge the first time. So Sarge asked him, like, how much input or how much do you rely on players' input with these cuts?
Yeah, the players' input is what they've done over the past couple months, right? The players' input is their play on the field, like how they've been, in the classroom, like how have they shown the growth, shown that development, like how those guys have grown. Like that's their input. Their film speaks louder than anything they could say, and also just their actions daily and how they show up and prepare for practice, right? How they show up available, right? How they take care of their body. So players' input is shown by their actions and what they've done over the past couple months.
Okay, so Sarge does clarify, but I think the way I envisioned it, when DeMeco had a good answer, which is like, yeah, their play on the field is their input. I just got this image of like American Idol contestants when they're trying to argue for why they shouldn't be eliminated. If guys, I might as a coach give a guy 2 minutes. If it was a guy I didn't like, like give me your 2-minute argument for why you belong on this team. And then he'd give a bunch of selfish reasons. And I was like, yeah, it's all great. I believe all of it. Problem is you didn't perform. And then it's just, you're fired or something like that. All right, last time Dark Side Def, because you do make some good points. You're right that I did perhaps, you know what it was? I paraphrased like one part of DeMeco's response about Dameon instead of painting the whole picture, because you're right. He did say that he hasn't had good blocking. This is part of my disconnect with DeMeco right now, is that I think I'm just, if it's not coach speak, then it's that I have a fundamentally different assessment of Dameon Pierce right now based on everything I saw last year and what I've seen in the preseason this year. And I watched almost all the practices that were in Houston. I had to miss a couple last week, but I've seen Dameon look good in practice too. The problem is that Dameon's power as a running back in 2022 was breaking tackles, and imperfect blocking for a running back isn't an excuse for only getting 1 yard per carry. So where my disconnect is right now with Dameon or DeMeco and some of the things he said about Dameon is more so that it's hard for me to think that DeMeco and Nick both feel like, yep, oh yeah, he's ready. He's ready. We know. Because and I'll tell you another thing that I've seen in practice when I think about it now, that I realized a couple days ago. He's been on the ground in practice a lot. Like there's no tackling, but Dameon's been on the ground. When he gets thudded up, he goes down. Like, so it's the good plays look really good. He looks decisive. He looks crisp, but he's not the same guy he was in 2022. And I don't, if DeMeco and Caserio are genuinely 100%, fully behind Dameon and feel like, nope, he's right where we need to be, I'm just going to be surprised. And this happens all the time. People disagree with coaches. Coaches disagree with other coaches about where a player is. And I might be wrong completely, and they might be right. It just, I'm kind of surprised if they genuinely feel 100% behind Dameon right now, based on both training camp, the practices, and the games, and then everything that happened last year. And this is the same staff that stuck with Dameon last year right up until he got injured. And then they realized, oh, okay, yeah, Dameon can't be that guy. And they didn't play him last year for large stretches of time. So I think that's where my disconnect is right now with all the speech. So that's it. Let's see. So Sarge clarified his question about whether players have input, and he said something along the lines of, let's see, it's phrased in the transcripts is, how much input do players have in the roster cuts of other players?
Oh yeah, Sarge, I respect the players' input, but solely at the end of the day, it's myself and Nick. It's our job to create the best roster for the Houston Texans. So that's why we're here, to make those decisions, and me and Nick will work through all of those.
I would say, based on my personal experience and just most other people I've ever talked to about this, it would be a very special circumstance if a player was asked by the coach about his opinion about whether a guy should be on the team or not. I think most of that, and I think usually people think about the quarterback immediately, like, okay, which receivers does he like? I think that for a coach to ask the quarterback that, it puts the quarterback in a difficult position. You think about CJ trying to have the trust of the guys in his room, and look, receivers are always, they're always going to be super nice to the quarterback. There's always that dynamic there, but it puts the quarterback in an awkward position. And I think the most notable case of this was when people thought that Tom Brady got Randy Moss fired. And, Brady said at the time, and he said later on, that he's never once been asked by Belichick or anybody about anything like that. And I think that's the appropriate approach. I would imagine Caserio feels the same way. I know, I think there's sometimes perhaps when there's like guys who are problems, like younger players or things like that, where they might ask a veteran player about how the guy fits in the team and everything, but he's never going to necessarily ask outright, like, do you think we should keep this guy? So I could be wrong. That's been my experience. There's 32 other teams in the league and decades of things that happen. Last question on if he and the scouts, if DeMeco and the scouts have conversations about players who have been waived by other teams.
Oh, through those conversations, that's Nick, and Nick is doing having most of those conversations, and it goes back to, right, how does the organization work well, and it's with myself being a head coach and Nick as a GM being tied together and in constant communication and always working together on everything that we do. So it has to be, there's a trust factor there. And I trust what Nick does and know he knows the type of players that we're looking for and the type of players that we're about. So it makes the transition for me, it makes all of the transactions very seamless because of the trust that we have in one another.
Yeah, I think part of what DeMeco's talking about there is that the conversations are always ongoing. So in forming that relationship and that trust, but then with the players on the current roster, they're having conversations all training camp long about how guys look and everything else like that. So I think I would suspect that DeMeco, for a lot, like the bulk of decisions, allows Nick to do what he thinks is right, because Nick's got to factor in the salary cap and age and all that other stuff. But they're gonna, like Nick, Nick's always been very open about how important it is to get DeMeco's feedback. It's a little bit. I remember Warren Buffett once said, you want to read and study and know as much as you possibly can about an industry or a stock or something, but sometimes it's just time where you got to make a decision. An opportunity comes up and you can't worry about all the things you don't know. So likewise, I think with the GM, he's got to be conscious of the head coach's time constraints and demands. So there's some decisions that Nick's going to make just on his own, and there's others where he's going to, if something involves a quarterback or something like that, or one of the veteran leaders, then there's conversations there. But it's always got to be paralysis by analysis. And since I'm carrying on an ongoing conversation with Darkside, he has this one's not about Dameon. I'll just bring this one up because CJ does seem like a GM on the team. Okay. When CJ earlier in the season said, I couldn't find the quote. He said something about how crazy it was that people were talking about Mechie possibly being traded or cut or something. That is, when the rubber meets the road somewhere along the way, somewhere down the line, the Texans are going to have to get rid of a player or trade a player that CJ really loves and wants. And I don't think it'll. In the moment, it might be a surprise to CJ. CJ knows that that's the business. And I think that's, again, where all the trust comes in. That because, man, and if we've gone even further down the line, since David Mulligetta did just obtain Derek Stingley as a client, by the way. Derek Stingley just hired David Mulligetta as a client. So when CJ, and it comes time for contract, if you think about the two players, the two really great quarterbacks who have signed team-friendly deals in this century, Tom Brady and Pat Mahomes come to mind. I know Pat Mahomes, it's a $500 million contract and everything. It was an extremely team-friendly contract when Pat Mahomes signed that. Like, the team has outs everywhere along the way. That right there happens when the quarterback trusts the organization. Like, Tom Brady trusted and knew that his opportunity to be the best quarterback he could be and to win the most Super Bowls he could was in the situation he was in. So you have to have that trust. I think Pat Mahomes, especially, he signed his right after they won a Super Bowl. He had Andy Reid. I know the Chiefs have taken a lot of black eyes in terms of how they treat their players, all that other stuff with those NFLPA surveys. But I think at the core of it all, I think Pat Mahomes trusts Andy Reid. And I think that CJ trusts, I think he totally trusts DeMeco and Caserio. So when those hard decisions have to be, like, let's say hypothetically John Mechie got traded, I think CJ would be really upset about it, but he would also be able to separate the business aspects of it from his personal feelings, and those are things that are going to happen a lot over the years in the NFL. So I'm not overly concerned about it, but it's life. It's life in the NFL. A lot of conversation on here about Will Anderson Yeah, like and Will's been working out. I think the big thing with Christian Harris, why I'm more worried about Christian Harris is kind of the mysteriousness and the length of the injury, and the fact that when he first went out to practice, the one day he ended up having to be helped off the field. Like those are the things. But I've seen guys working out. I don't want to read too much into it. Let's see. Nick and others are looking for a swing tackle, D-line, and a safety. The swing tackle is an interesting one because I like Blake Fisher a lot. I don't think he's ready right this moment. If he had to start in week 1, I'd be nervous about it. Now Slowick can help him out, but it does slow down what you can do on offense. Remember last year when Laramie Tunsil came back, that's when the offense really started to click because all of a sudden you didn't have to keep your tight ends staying in to help your offensive tackles as much. And, George Fant ended up being big for that team. So I wonder because I think Blake Fisher's close. He just needs seasoning. So I wonder if maybe they would just throw him out to the Wolves if hypothetically they needed him in week 1. But there might be this year's version of George Fant might be out there on the waiver wire, and they might pick up somebody like that. And it's not like it's a condemnation of Blake Fisher or anything. It's that Blake Fisher is a guy who went in the second round because people kind of thought, okay, he's probably kind of a project. Maybe should have stayed in college for one more year and could have been a first-round pick. But I do feel good about him in the long term. Turnover in the NFL is probably close to Walmart. It's like, it's over 50% every year, right? It's got to be. You keep 53 guys. You cut half it's pretty damn close, especially on this team. I hope we don't move Mechie too, not just for any sentimental reasons or anything, but I think he still has untapped upside. I think this is the first training camp where he was fully physically healthy, and you saw it click for him, and you'd think, okay, even as he gets better, like Xavier Hutchinson is so smooth and so dependable and reliable. And he's been working in this offense now for a year, and he's figured a lot of things out. And I think as Mechie hopefully can start to get into that onto that page too. I wouldn't want to let him go. I think there's still untapped upside there. Let's see. That's a good question. Sorry, I didn't see what the original question was. Lots of injury stuff. Did the coaching staff want Dameon to lose weight, or did he do that of his own volition? I feel the combination of imperfect blocking, his lack of power, and inability to read blocks is why he struggled. I think you're there. I've been harping on the weight thing, and I do think that's a part of it. I know, man. Like sometimes guys gaining or losing a few pounds is overblown, but with Dameon, he's markedly slimmer than he was his rookie year. And like some guys just think of major league pitchers. Some guys just they're being kind of chunky works for them. And some of the all-time greats being kind of chunky worked for them. That was the right body weight for them. It's not like especially with a pitcher, man. You lose some of that brute strength if you lose 15 pounds and all of a sudden your fastball is not the same or whatever it might be. With a running back, man, the physics get big. That extra 15 to 20 pounds of heft on a smaller stature dude, it's like you feel it, man. Like it was like Jerome Bettis wasn't the fastest guy in the world, but my God, I don't think if Jerome Bettis, and I'm showing my age here, that's like the biggest body guy that I played against a bunch. If Jerome Bettis had lost 20 pounds, would he have been would it have provided him so much extra athleticism that he would be better than he was when he was 20 pounds heavier? I don't think so. It worked really well for Jerome Bettis. So you guys have had a bunch of really good and lively conversations, but it makes it hard for me to pick out who where the questions are. So plus I told my wife I was going to be done working about 45 minutes ago. So happy wife, happy Seth, all that stuff. You know the old saying. Everybody, please like, subscribe, everything else. Darkside Dev, thank you. I think you did bring up some good points on the way I was discussing it, so I appreciate the pushback and any other pushback I get from anybody else. If I get sensitive in the moment, I get over it later, and then I'll DM anybody and apologize or whatever. It's never personal. It's always me.